Good evening. It is Wednesday, June 17th. Um, it has been a while since I've recorded in my kitchen. I don't have my headphones or my microphone, they are at the church. Um, but we are going to talk about over the next few weeks. Um, we're going to look at kind of some imperfect people in the Bible, kind of perfectly imperfect people in the Bible. And we're going to look at, Abraham, David, Gideon, Moses. And so tonight we're looking at Abraham. But before we do that, you've probably seen videos of what I'm about to talk about. But more than 50 years ago, Stanford University conducted a study on preschoolers, commonly known as the marshmallow test. So what they would do is they were taken into this room and they were given a marshmallow and told that if they could wait 15 minutes before eating it, they would get a second marshmallow. Now, if they ate the marshmallow before the 15 minutes, they would not get a second one. And so what these adults would do is they would leave the child alone in the room with the marshmallow, and they'd have this hidden camera, and they would wait on the other side of the wall. And only about 1/3 were willing to wait. You've probably seen a video similar to this. But in the following years, they actually checked up on the kids as they became adults and they progressed in life. And those that could wait, those that could, delay gratification on a whole or as a whole, they were able to kind of be much more successful in life. So they realized that there were three types of kids in this study, in this marshmallow test. Those who waited patiently, those who delayed gratification, those who ate their marshmallow either immediately or after some time, but before the 15 minutes was up. And then you have those who tried to get as close to eating it as possible without really taking an actual bite. They might lick it, they might nibble on it, hollow it out, and kind of hope that no one would notice. But in the studies, kids who waited often had higher SAT scores, they got more education, they were less likely to be overweight. So tonight we are going to look at a man from the Bible who didn't have to take the marshmallow test, but he had to learn a difficult lesson about being impatient. He had to learn that God's timing was the best timing and that trying to speed up the clock, trying to force God's hand, doesn't work out for the good in most cases. So I'm going to start off by saying this. 8 minutes. That's it. 8 minutes. That is not how long I plan on having this lesson, but that is the current average attention span of children. I would even go as far as to say adults. Be it from TV programming segments, video games, the average child cannot hold their attention on a subject on average for more than 8 minutes at a time. So along with a short attention span, we live in a world of instant gratification. We want everything immediately at our asking. Microwave pizzas, high-speed internet, music streaming, video streaming. You even have the 30-second skip forward button on remotes that allow us to skip over the commercials when we're watching TV. These are all examples of instant gratifications in our lives. And there's probably hundreds more that I could have listed here. But with almost everything being immediately within our grasps, having the patience to wait for something to happen hours, days, weeks, years down the road is difficult, if not impossible. So having patience, or the lack thereof, is not an issue. It's not a new issue, I should say. It was a problem for one of the pillars of the Christian faith, the man that we're going to look at tonight, in Abraham. For being the father of the nation of Israel, you would expect that Abraham would be nearly perfect in his life. But as we're going to see, that's not necessarily the case all the time. The story of Abraham is the start of God making a covenant with what will become the nation of Israel, the nation, the Israelites. So God tells Abraham, who was called Abram at the time, to pack up and move his family to the land of Canaan, which will be the promised land that God will give to all of Abraham's descendants. So when God gives this instruction to Abram or Abraham, he's about 75 years old at the time. Now that's pretty old by our standards, but during this time, people could live up to about 400 years. So the journey for Abram or Abraham to Ur, where he was born and where he was living, to the promised land of Canaan was about 1,000 miles. Can you imagine that journey without a car? Any car ride over an hour long gets serious consideration if it's really worthwhile. I can't even fathom having to travel over 1,000 miles, let alone by donkey or camel. How long did that journey take them? And so when Abraham and Sarah arrive in Canaan, God makes them a promise. He tells them that the land they have just entered will be given to their descendants. Now, there's only one problem. Sarah is unable to have children. She's barren and she's past the age of having children. So let's recap this situation here. Abraham has been told by God to uproot his family and all of his stuff, move it 1,000 miles across the country, and has been given this promised land that will be given to his children, of which he has none at that time. So here is Abraham, 75 years old, and God is making him a promise to give him a child. In Genesis 15:6, God makes a promise to Abraham, and this is his response. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. So Abraham has faith that God will come through on his promise to give him a son, but little does Abraham know the test of patience that is coming. So you kind of pick up the story when Abraham, with Abraham 10 years later, he is now 86 years old. God has yet to fulfill his promise of giving Abraham and Sarah an heir. Understandably, they are a little impatient. So Sarah and Abraham decide to kind of take the matter of having a child into their own hands rather than waiting on God. So through an unusual but accepted practice in their time, Abraham is able to have a child with Sarah's maidservant, Hagar, or Hagar, however you want to pronounce it. Now, this was not the son that God had promised to Abraham, but God would eventually bless that child. This would not be the end of Abraham's waiting, though. In chapter 17 of Genesis, we see that God renews his covenant with Abraham. It says, when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless. Then I will make my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers. Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? Then God said, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. So 13 years after the birth of Ishmael, Abraham and Sarah are still waiting for their promised child. Understandably, there has been some doubt starting to form if this was even really going to happen, to the point of Abraham laughing at God when he makes the covenant again. Almost 25 years now, after being instructed by God to move 1,000 miles to the promised land, and Abraham is still waiting on an heir to be born. I don't know about you, but 25 years seems like a long time. For most of us, we don't like to wait the recommended 3 to 5 minutes that pizza roll instructions tell us after heating them up. Well, we just kind of choose to suffer the consequences of burning the inside of our mouths rather than waiting for them to cool a little bit. But imagine having to wait 25 years. But in spite of the years that he has already waited, Abraham places his faith in God's promise again and continues to wait for God to come through. Now, you may be saying to yourself, okay, how can someone that has waited 25 years for a promise be considered impatient? And in all respects, you're correct if you've been thinking that. And I know that there are probably a couple teens that are watching this that have brought that into question. Waiting 25 years is the model of patience. The imperfect part of Abraham is trying to jump ahead of God's timetable. See, he tried to take matters into his own hands and force the will of God to happen. While Abraham was able to have a son with Hagar, this was not the son that God had promised. In fact, Abraham had to beg God to bless Ishmael in chapter 17, asking him to find favor on Ishmael, even though he was not the child of promise. So Ishmael's descendants would later cause problems for the Israelites as those descendants went on to form opposing nations. We still see this fight going on today. But Abraham had to wait a long time to find out that God's promises are true and that he will keep them. He also learned that God's promises and blessings are the best when we wait for God to fulfill them. So as I close, what about us today? How does this affect our lives today? And I'm going to kind of close with this. Most of the people that are watching this video are not even close to 25 years old. So, let's just say the average age of everybody watching this is 15 years old. Imagine having to wait until you turned 40 to receive a gift that was promised to you at age 15. Now, I'm just going to put this in perspective. Some of you think I'm way older than I really am. I'm 33. So if you waited until my age, you still had to wait 7 more years. That concept is mind-blowing. In a world of people that will wait outside of a phone store on the day of its release in order to have the newest and best before anyone else, waiting for a promise seems like a daunting task. But waiting on God has its benefits. God tests and strengthens our faith by having us wait on His perfect will to be fulfilled. He doesn't want us to settle for the good enough or for the okay things in life. He wants us to have the best. So we're going to continue looking at the story of David next week. So I hope that you guys will tune into that. Hope that everyone joins us next Tuesday night at 7 o'clock for Zoom. Don't forget about the devotionals that come out on YouTube and Facebook every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And so that's all I have, and I hope that you have a great night.